Hello crafters, I'm Sarita and I'm here to teach you all about finishing your cross-stitch projects. Today we're going to be talking about making these wearable cross-stitch pendants. I've been asked about them a lot, so I figured I'd go ahead and show you my process. I do have a text-based tutorial linked down below if you would prefer, or if you just want to follow along while you work. Now there are different ways to do this. You don't have to do it exactly like I do. This is just an example to inspire you and get you started. Now let's dive into today's project. First, let's talk about materials. Alright, besides your normal needle and thread, you'll need a few extra things to complete your cross-stitch pendant. First, you'll want to choose your pendant trays. I tend to favor these 1-inch round trays, and I get mine off of Amazon. I'll link the listing I usually use down below in the description. However, if you look around, you'll find larger trays, trays that are square, oval, heart-shaped, you name it. Once you've decided on your trays, though, their size and shape will determine what patterns will fit and what fabric to use. For example, since the pendant trays that I purchased are 1-inch rounds, I can only fit 1-inch design in them. That means if I'm using 14 count fabric, I can only fit a design that's 14 by 14. Instead, I usually use 28 count and stitch over one so that I can fit a full 28 by 28 design in that same space. Since they're round, I also want to make sure that there's nothing in the corners so that when I cut them off, that design isn't getting cut off as well. If you've picked up different trays, you'll want to do some math and ensure that the pattern you want will fit using the fabric of your choice. Now the next thing you'll need is either one of these matching cabochons, I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that, so bear with me, or you can use cardstock instead. My pendants come with these rounded domed cabochons that fit right in there. But if yours don't, you can just use some cardstock cut to size. If you're using cardstock, you'll either need a pencil and scissors to trace the tray and cut it out according to size. Or, for example, I used 1-inch hole punch since it fits perfectly. Optionally, you can also get some stuffing. That way you can pad the top of your tray, your cardstock, so that it still has that rounded shape that a cabochon would give. Now, I often prefer the look of the flatter cardstock over these bulkier glass domes, but both are nice options depending on what you want. Do you have a preference? Let me know in the comments if you think you prefer these domed glass pendants or just a simple stuffed cardstock tray. Regardless, you'll also need some strong adhesive to glue your fabric into these metal trays. I recommend this E6000, that's what I use for pretty much everything. You can see that this tube has been through a lot. But if you have a go-to glue, feel free to use that. I also like to keep binder clips on hand to actually hold the piece together while the glue dries, but you could also simply pin it under something heavy. Lastly, you'll need some sort of chain or cord to actually hang the pendant on. You can get pretty much any sort of necklace type items. I'll link some of my options down below, including these colorful cords or the nickel free chains, just as an example. I'm assuming since you're watching this that you already know how to cross stitch, but if not, I'll link to a basic cross stitch tutorial down below. For today's example though, I stitched using on 28 count even weave in order to be able to fit a larger design into my tray. Although it's a higher count, I used the normal 2 strands of thread. However, I only did half stitches or 10th stitches. That way the stitches aren't too crowded and the design stitches up faster. Now I used a pretty small square of fabric, just a little bit bigger than the chosen tray. You don't need a lot of extra room for this, but you want at least enough fabric to be able to fold back around the tray. Once you've stitched off the design, you'll want to cut out just leaving about a 1/2-inch border. This is usually the scariest part, but you'll actually want to round out the design like so. Okay. Then you'll want to do just a loose running stitch around the edges of your fabric. Doesn't have to be neat, doesn't have to be fancy. It can be in whatever color you want, as it's not going to be seen. I usually use whatever color I was last working on. In this case, it's a green of some sort. I don't even remember what number it was. 163, I want to say. Doesn't matter. Now don't tie it off at the end, just leave it as that. Now you'll want to take your glass cabochon and just kind of put it in there with the domed side out towards the design, and just pull on that last thread so it cinches in like that. Now if you don't have one of those glass trays, like I said before, you can just use cardstock. I like to put a little bit of stuffing in before the cardstock, that way it's still kind of a domed look on the front. But either way, you're gonna pull that thread and cinch it. You'll want to check the front to make sure it's centered and everything fits. You'll then want to sew the opening shut in the back, just crisscross across. So we'll start over on this side and go straight across. The goal is to pin down these little corners that form. So you'll work your way around. Alternating sides. Now it doesn't matter if your fabric meets up in the middle, so if you cut it a little short and it doesn't quite match up, that's okay. The main purpose is just to get it flat and just to get it to go around the edge of the tray. You don't want to pull too hard if it's the cardstock, otherwise you'll actually bend your card. The point of the card is just to give you a guide to keep that rounded shape, or to keep it at the right size if you're not using a round. Once you've got it laying flat, you can tie off your thread. I like to do a couple of knots just to be safe. Once that's been stitched up, you'll be gluing this into your tray. Now you don't want to use too much glue, otherwise it'll take forever to dry and you run the risk of, when you press down on it, it'll seep up around the edges. But you don't want to use too little either, otherwise it won't dry or it won't stay secure. Make sure you center it with the top of your tray. And then I use binder clips to keep it in place while it dries. If you don't have binder clips on hand, just set it underneath something heavy. And there you have it. Once that glue is dried, you'll just attach a chain or a cord to it, and you'll have this lovely little pendant. As I mentioned previously, I've linked a text-based tutorial down below so that you can follow along as you work. If you've learned something from this video, please leave a like, and if you'd like to see more tutorials like this in the future, please subscribe as well. If you would just like to keep up to date on what I'm working on currently, be sure to follow on Twitter or Instagram. But whatever you decide to do, keep creating.